Welcome to the first episode of Jelly Jam Spam. I'm future gadget number 24, Jelly Joel.
And I'm Gel Banan Jam. And welcome to the Steins Gate episode.
Yeah, we're talking about Steins Gate today. So this was our first nomination. I chucked it to you, and this is the show that we kind of bonded over. Besides Higurashi, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll talk about that another time. But yeah. So I just want to talk about the history of Steins Gate for just a moment here. So it started off as a visual novel in 2009, which was developed by Nitro Plus, which was then adapted into a show in 2010. That was by White Fox Studio. But the more interesting thing is it's kind of all based off this really weird conspiracy theory that started in 1997. So I'm not going to go into full details here, but basically somebody was commissioned to do something for their job, and they put an ad in a newspaper. And it was about this time-traveling person who wanted to stop World War III. And in the advertisement, he said, safety not guaranteed. Looking for somebody to time travel with them. And over the next decade, a lot of people responded seriously to it, and it kind of became a meme online.
There's actually a movie based on that as well.
Yeah, it's actually called Safety Not Guaranteed. And the character was called John Titor. So we're now going to see that throughout Steins Gate. It's pretty cool that a visual novel and a show actually used some weird artifact from the internet as a basis for their story, at least a premise. They go in a different direction with it, but it's pretty cool, don't you think?
Yeah, they use a lot of real world stuff in the They use a lot of real world stuff throughout Steins Gate, which is really interesting. I'll talk some more about that later, but the IBM stuff, there's so many conspiracies about IBM.
Yeah.
So many. So pick one. And yeah, it just adds that added layer of realism, makes it very intriguing.
Yeah. It was followed up by another visual novel game called Steins Gate Zero, which kind of shows, we'll talk about it, but it kind of shows the preceding timeline that gets us to the winning timeline. I don't know how else to describe that, which is pretty interesting. And you know more about this than I do, but it's part of a larger franchise, this science adventure franchise.
Something I definitely forgot to look up for the podcast. But yes, it's part of this much bigger franchise. They actually have a game coming out soon-ish, I think next year perhaps, that stars Kirisu.
Oh, really?
One of the main characters. She's doing a crossover appearance or something, so I'm very excited for that. But also, I want to get into some of the other stuff in the series, see all the different crossovers. There's a lot of stuff to do with AI and virtual worlds. So yeah, it is a very big, very interesting franchise.
Out of curiosity, so you were the one who actually taught me about that, because I wasn't aware it's part of a larger thing. Is it kind of like a loose connection? They exist in the same universe, but they're not really tied together? Or is it they're much more directly correlated? Do you know?
Not really. As far as I know, they're loosely connected, but I have a sneaking suspicion some of the scientific breakthroughs that happen in Steins Gate are related to what happens later, such as in Steins Gate Zero, the Kirisu AI.
Mm-hmm.
But that'll probably be for another podcast, because...
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, we definitely need to dive in deeper to those big science brain
Steins
things.
Gate Zero might pop up at some point, but we'll probably talk about it a little bit. So, Julia, you played the visual novel first.
Yes.
So we approached this in different ways. I was aware of the visual novel, but I hadn't really interacted with the visual novel until this year, and I still haven't completed it, but my experience is purely from the anime side. So what was your experience playing the visual novel that you did?
So I'll start by saying I played Steins Gate Elite, not the original visual novel. So Steins Gate Elite combines the original story with clips and animations from the anime.
Mm-hmm.
So not only was this kind of my first visual novel in a while, but it was the first time I'd ever seen one that was that interactive, because normally visual novels, you have the background, you have the static character picture, etc.
They get to steal their production value, essentially.
Yes, they did animate new panels for some of for the different endings. They had different animated scenes that you don't see in the anime, which is interesting. I actually rewatched this right before the podcast, and you can kind of tell that there was a difference with the time, that there was a time lapse, because Ocarin's eyes get a lot darker, a bit more wild in the new cutscenes as opposed to in the anime, where it's all pretty much beat for beat the same.
And a big deal with that is they have voice acting from the show.
Oh, the voice acting is so good.
So in the original visual novel, no voice acting. You just have as the text scrolls across. I will say one thing, and this is I'm not speaking for you here. I think the art in the original visual novel kind of sucks. I think it looks terrible, actually. It's kind of like at some point we'll probably talk about the Zero Escape series, but the art in 999 is not good. Or Virtue's Last Reward is a bit better, but with these visual novels, the art kind of sucks in these earlier visual novels, I should say, because, I mean, it costs a lot of money. Like, I don't want to disparage that, but yeah, I'm not a big fan of that original art.
I'm not a fan of it just because, visual novels probably aren't my big thing. But we have played a little of Steins Gate Zero with the original artwork. The Elite version is coming out pretty soon as well, I think. So yeah, the art is beautiful in the visual novel, but it just doesn't have the same impact as using those moving anime clips does.
For sure, yeah.
Because visual novels otherwise are pretty static and boring, but the way that it integrates the anime as well gives it a bit of movement, makes it a bit more immersive, I would say.
Absolutely, and again, we'll go over it, but the voice acting in this specifically brings so much to this product. I'm kind of glad I never played that original visual novel, because again, the voice acting brings so much to it. Just having beeps and bops, the voice would be fine because the story's still very good, but specifically Ocarin, that voice actor, I have his name here, Mamoru Miyano, I believe it is. Excuse my pronunciation. This guy does an incredible job.
He is so good. And, there's an aesthetic to the beep boops.
Absolutely.
But, yes, having all of the, fully voice-acted visual novel, it's fantastic. Everybody does such a great job, especially Ocarin.
So, ultimately, this story is about time travel and parallel worlds, actually. How do you think you would go with this whole time travel mess, Julia?
So let's just put it out there right up. I have a very irrational fear of slipping into a parallel universe, whether it's via time travel or not. It all started when I read a book as a kid called The Last Universe by William Slater. And one of my favorite sci-fi TV shows was Sliders. And ever since then, I've been terrified of falling into a parallel universe, not being able to get out. So if this was me, I would not touch it at all. Unless we can totally guarantee that time travel is observation only, I am not getting involved.
You're not going to the Divergence, not 1%?
I am not going anywhere.
No Divergence for you?
And if I recall, when Ocarin started to send the D-mails, I was spamming you non-stop being like, no, don't send the D-mails. There's actually a line where he says, gee, I shouldn't have sent so many D-mails. And I texted you and was like, yeah, you fucking shouldn't have, you idiot.
But then there's no story.
Then there's no story, so yes.
So, yeah, it's interesting, because when I first presented the show to you, before you had started the visual novel, I said, it's about time travel, but then I kind of changed the way I talked to you about it. I initially said time travel is the premise. It's not really. It's kind of about parallel worlds, right?
It's a bit, yeah, because the world lines theory, it is kind of parallel universes, and there's a lot of questions about, what happens to the original Ocarina when his brain, transfers over. Is he actually changing time, or is he just transferring to a timeline that's better for him?
I think when it comes down to it, it's kind of both. I do want to touch on that a little bit later though, because that's kind of a heavy one there though. But how did you feel going into this with this fear that you described? Were you cool with it? Because you're a big fan of Higurashi as well, right?
Yeah, I say it's a fear, but I do love time travel stories. They are always interesting. They're always filled with some scientific mumbo jumbo. I did have a story written as a kid about triggering the grandfather paradox. So it is all very interesting. I was super sold on the idea, hence why I bought the visual novel right out the gate and got it done within a couple of weeks.
I find with time travel stories, they're either done very well or not well at all.
Ooh, is it Looper? Where he goes back to kill himself?
There are some loopholes in Looper, but I feel like there's some sort of, especially with time travel stories, I feel like there's a certain level of buy-in that you need to go in with, because if you're really looking for loopholes or things like that, it can kind of ruin the story, because I think there are actually loopholes in this story as well.
Oh, absolutely. When it comes to time travel, there's always going to be something, because we haven't figured it out yet, or have we? CERN is a real organization just with a C, so who knows? I've seen a collider.
Let's speak about CERN for a second. So the show and the visual novel use safety not guaranteed as a premise, but they go into this huge conspiracy in this really cool direction, and it involves the
the Large Hadron Collider.
The Large Hadron Collider, and in this universe, in the show's universe, I should say, they're trying to time travel with it. And one of my favorite lines from the entire show is "Human is dead. Mismatch." As we uncover the conspiracy that CERN's been time traveling for decades.
The Jellyman reports.
They're the Jellyman reports, and how they've killed a lot of people because it's a race to whoever gets to do this first. If lots of people are aware that it's possible, whoever can do it first essentially controls the world, and that's what happens. So what do you think about the premise and where they go? This whole World War III and a scientific organization taking over the world and controlling time, and the future rebellion that Suzuha... I'll go into Suzuha later, but because she's a fantastic character. But do you think that's a good grounding for this story?
Oh, absolutely. It's fictional possible. If we did actually have time travel, of course there'd be a kind of arms race to it. And again, there's a lot of grounds in reality, quotation marks, for these conspiracies, like with IBM. The IBM... is it 5100?
It's 5100.
Yeah, the IBM 5100 is a machine that exists. And fun story, my dad worked for IBM in the tape libraries, and I actually asked him about, did you ever get to use an IBM 5100? And he goes, nah, they were on the second floor, I didn't get to touch those. So, darn. But there's so much grounding in reality for these
having its own proprietary coding language. Generally speaking, that doesn't happen. We kind of just use Linux or DOS when it comes down to it. They kind of just get adapted worldwide. But having your own scripting language is actually a really big deal. And that's why Daru has to completely learn how to read it and write it.
Yep, it's a real thing.
Yeah.
It's like when shows use the golden ratio. I love it when shows do that because a real mathematical formula. It's a real thing that you see spirals everywhere. Uzumaki alert.
This is a bit of a tangent, but one of my favorite things is if you have a magic system in some type of media, I always point to the King Killer Chronicles for this. If the magic system has really specific rules, so in the King Killer Chronicles, it's essentially just maths. it is actually magic, but it has such a harsh rule set that you essentially like need to know really high level maths to be able to even perform it. I love that sort of thing. So taking like a real life concept and extrapolating it to something really cool for a story, I'm also a really big fan of, and that's usually the example I go to for that.
It's a bit of a stretch of the imagination, but the whole process that Kirisu goes through to figure out you can only transfer this much data. If we do a scan of your brain, we have to put it through the collider to compress the data. Yeah, all of that, fantastic. It's great. It really makes you feel like this could happen. Maybe not with a microwave.
Yeah, maybe not with a microwave. They kind of just stumble across this technology. And as far as I remember, they literally just hook up a phone to a microwave to turn it on and to turn it off. I think that's the only reason why. They just want a phone-controlled microwave, right?
I should know this because I did just watch the anime. I do believe they are trying to test teleportation, but yes, essentially in the first stages of the experiment, they do just hook up a phone to a microwave. It has a what do you call it? A remote access app.
Yeah.
And then that's how they do it. And then suddenly all their bananas are turning to goo.
Yeah, it's and they kind of hinted it at first because they talk about Mayuri's chicken and how it gets colder instead of warmer, but it's not really. And they think initially, oh, it's freezing things, but no, it's just it's going back in time to a colder state because it was frozen when they first put it in there. So that I find that actually pretty interesting. They kind of give you little hints.
And this is way before they found out that they have to use the lifter, which is the 48-inch CRT downstairs.
Mr. Brown.
Mr. Brown. So, yeah, it's all a happy accident. That all starts with the first email.
And they happen to bump into one of the leading scientists on time travel theory, Kurisu, who is such an interesting character.
Oh, boy. They're all interesting characters, but yeah, Kirisu is a whole different level. The secret channeler.
Yeah, I mean, John Titor, really. Or at least she goes by that in this universe where John Titor doesn't exist. Because John Titor only exists in the 1% divergent timeline.
The real John Titor, yeah.
Yeah, since the first email, they're in a universe where John Titor doesn't exist. And that has to do with some Suzuha stuff. But just parking on Kurisu for a moment, I mean, what did you think about her emotional growth throughout the show? Because it takes her a really long time to really open up to anybody.
I giggle every time people bring up, you're such a tsundere. Because she kind of is.
Oh,
She's very cold at the beginning.
She totally is. You got me ramen? It's not like I wanted you to get me ramen or anything, Babaka. Like, she's definitely tsundere, but really, like, what do you think about the way she opens up to Ocarina and everything, and her past with her father? Like, did you empathize with that at all? Or?
Definitely. There's a very how to put it. She's so cold and closed off in the beginning, and so science brain. You kind of don't see the picture of her as a woman, as a person. But the more you go on, the more you realize she's actually very sincere. She really believes in the lab members and what they're doing, and she recognizes that the science is legitimate. And it's very interesting considering the history she has with her father and how at first she's so against time travel because that essentially tore apart their family because their father's a narcissistic asshole.
He is. Speaking to what you were saying, like, we do see those two sides of her. Like, the first one I want to bring up is, like, when she's shutting down Ocarina in the seminar. Like, she completely schools him as far as science is concerned, and she makes a big deal of it. But then, at another point in the show, when she's finally opening up, she just, like, cuddles a soft toy and cries into it. And Ocarina doesn't really know how to handle that. But just being there means a lot to her. And seeing both sides, talking about just, like, being a person and being a woman and being, like, showing weakness, I guess. when she needs to put on this front of being so strong all the time. I really like that dichotomy for Kurise.
And she also has this endless curiosity. Like, the whole reason she ends up at the lab is she's thinking, what the hell, this guy shows up and tells me I was going to die and then tries to fill me up to double check what's going on with this. And that's how she gets to the lab, becomes a lab member. Even though she really doesn't want to experiment with time travel, she is eventually convinced to send the D-mails and then is convinced to undo the D-mails.
That curiosity got her to taste the banana, the gel nana.
What is it with all of the girls in this thing and tasting the banana?
Must taste the banana.
Ugh,
but she doesn't.
Tastes like nothing.
Well, she does it out of scientific curiosity, and works out pretty quickly that it was just broken down at the molecular level. Like, that's pretty cool.
She is an 18-year-old genius.
She is. Let's talk about how do you feel about the antagonistic force in this story? So that's CERN, to an extent Mr. Braun, and as an extension Moeka. I actually just want to know about how you feel about her specifically. How do you feel like she fits in with the lab and with the story in general? Do you think she adds to the story?
So let's start with CERN. CERN, big tick. As I said, they're a real organisation that just kind of changed around for the purposes of this isn't real. Great. The Rounders, they're a bit more, how to put it, more villainy. I'm not a huge fan of them. Moeka herself, not bad, although I wish I could say I saw it coming. I didn't. But I do not understand why Ocarin really wants to associate with her after the whole mess is over.
That makes no sense.
Yeah, because she tried to kill Mayuri so many times.
That's a visual novel. Everyone has a happy ending. Like, this happens a lot. At least in the visual novels that I've read. This is kind of like a trope, I guess.
Her as a character I find very compelling. Her story, as in, like, when she gets killed, and we'll talk more about that because it differs in the visual novel to the anime.
Well, bring it up here.
So in the visual novel, she doesn't get killed by Mr. Braun. Mr. Brown kills himself, and then Nay, his daughter, has an insane psychotic break and comes and kills her, and then runs off screaming, I'll come back for you, Ocarin, which is kind of interesting to me. I immediately thought that she had been like hijacked by one of the time leaps. She was super sus to me, but then nothing else happened of it. And then in the anime, Mr. Brown just kills her, which makes more sense. But crazy nay.
I feel like the motivation of Moeka and the Rounders in general, I don't think they have really good motivators. They're
weirdly vague. Like, I get
Moeka's makes the most, as far as motivation is concerned, like, there's a direct path to why she's doing things. I don't think she actually adds much to the story personally. But Mr. Braun, I just don't really think it works that much.
It's kind of weird. And also, why not just send her to find another IBN? Because in the show, he's just like, well, you found the IBN, I don't need you anymore. And then she kills herself. It's, like, that makes sense for her because she's addicted to FB, but why not just repurpose her as an agent? Like, it's just weird that they just kill her off.
Yeah, I think they would definitely, it feels to me like they wanted a certain outcome in the story in regards to that, and they decided on their conclusion and just did what they could to get to the conclusion without really thinking about it. It kind of feels like an afterthought almost.
Yeah, and even Ocarin brings it up to Mr. Braun. He's like, well, why would you do this to Suzuha? And he's like, how dare you say that name? She has nothing to do with... She has everything to do... How did he not know that she was searching for an IBN 5100?
Who knows?
It's just a bit weird.
So, you brought up being sus with Moeka.
No, it starts with Nay.
Well, yeah, but
Oh, but not
that
yeah.
whole situation. How soon did you clue on to Suzuha and what was going on with her?
Suzuha, I clued in that something was up with her pretty early because she does all those weird, quirky things. Like Ocarina offhandedly mentions he's brainwashed, and she jumps on him and goes, "Oh, there's no chip in your eye. It's okay."
I actually think these scenes are actually like they might be my favorite scenes.
They are some of the best scenes. It's some of the best foreshadowing in a show that it's great.
There's a scene where Ocarina is looking for Suzuha, and he finds her. And a helicopter flies overhead, and she freaks out. And he's like, well, "What do you mean? It's just it's just a news helicopter." But from when she's from, that's death. That's people searching for a rebellion. And to the first time viewer, that's not really apparent. But they do leave all these clues for you, like you were saying with the brainwash comment. Man, the first time she sees Kurisu...
Oh, yeah, and she flips. She's like, "You are a bad egg." My favourite scenes upon rewatch is when she casually mentions, "Oh, so you guys have built a time machine," and Ocarina's like, "How did you know that?" And she's like, "Oh, you just left the window open." Like, no, she knows. The window's an excuse, but then later they kind of red herring you to confirm, yeah, the window's open and everyone can hear Daru being a pervert, so...
Yes.
A pervert gentleman, as it were.
Just a pervert. It's interesting. They actually use that story element a lot. This is during summer in Japan, in an uncomfortably hot time. And they actually use that many times throughout the story to kind of facilitate things. We're talking about the open window. A lot of times when they're carrying the IBM or they're doing shopping and like people are exhausted afterwards. Just like a little weather thing. They actually like incorporate into the story like a bunch of times.
It's a good point. I didn't notice that. And the lab is always hot too.
Yeah, absolutely. So just keeping on with Suzuha right now, it might be clear with the way I'm talking about her. She is probably my favorite character. Maybe not my favorite, but she's right up there.
Once you kind of add all the clues together, like it came together pretty quick. I also guessed pretty quickly about Daru being her father, and I got thrown off by the red herring they kind of threw when
they spend basically an entire episode on that mystery.
Yeah.
Like she mentions her dad several times, but then later on they're just like, okay, this episode is about her dad, and they just it's when they're fixing the time machine, right? Daru's just like, "Oh yeah, this kind of makes sense." It's like, well, yeah, because you built it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool. All these like little clues that they leave.
And Mayuri saying they make a good pair.
They do make a good pair.
Yeah, because they're father and daughter.
Mentioning Daru, how do you feel about Daru?
Oh, love-hate Daru. Like, he is the perv of the gang, and there's always a perv of the gang in the animes.
Yeah.
The animes. But, like, he is super smart. He's the resident hacker.
Well, he learns the scripting code for the IBM 5100 in, like, a few days.
Mm-hmm. He fixes a time machine.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, no, you're right. But, like, that's kind of incredible, actually. And he does hack into CERN. This guy is... It's interesting that Ocarina, by happenstance, surrounds himself with geniuses, right?
I feel like Daru's... He's almost the comic relief, but there isn't really a comic relief in Steins Gate because Ocarina is ridiculous.
Yeah, that's true.
Everyone's a bit of the comic relief at times. But no, Daru, love-hate him. His whole thing with the May Queen and Faris and the Moe culture. Yeah.
Speaking of Faris...
I was convinced she was sus. I thought she was sus for the whole thing.
You kept messaging me about that.
Yeah, she goes along with Ocarina from the very start. And now that I've watched it, I'm like, oh, I get it. It's because, like, of the maid thing, but also she just kind of likes him.
Yeah, I find you don't really see this anywhere, and I find it really interesting. The dynamic between Ocarina and Faris is really interesting. They're just kind of both into each other's bullshit. They're kind of permanently role-playing with each other. What do you think about that?
Well, let's get into one of my favorite endings for the visual novel, the Faris ending. So, what happens is Ocarina doesn't want to send the D-mail to kill her father. So they send a slightly different D-mail. I was trying to find exactly what it was, but I couldn't. It's something to do with locating an IBN 5100 and donating it to the shrine. Anyway, they do that, but what happens is, as a result, Ocarina never meets Mayuri and never meets Daru. He meets Faris at a Rhinet battle tournament. They instantly gel. They become battle partners, and eventually they become partners, because Faris falls in love with him.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where our Ocarina gets deposited after a time leap. So he, all of a sudden, does not remember anything. He doesn't know how to play the Rainet. I know I've pronounced it differently every time.
That's
Whatever, fine. That'll do. And he doesn't remember loving Faris. He's really confused because he doesn't have any friends anymore, and the time machine hasn't been completed, so he can't do anything about it. But luckily for him, Mayuri's safe. And him and Faris just have the most heartbreaking conversation, because...
Sorry, I'm not the Ocarina you know.
Yeah, basically. And she makes a joke that she's gonna... I'll make you remember with my body, and then she, like, glomps on him, but then she just breaks down crying and says, you know, you're not the Ocarina I know. I wish I could make you remember. I wish I'd lost my memory, because then I wouldn't hurt so much.
Oh, man.
I'm all alone. And then Ocarina is like, well, I'm also all alone because you're the only person I know in this timeline. I'm not connected to my friends anymore. I don't have the lab. You're it. And they both just kind of agree that they're both alone, so they're going to be together. And it's so sweet. It's one of the only...
So that's like an actual conclusion.
Yeah, they become battle partners again, and they go on, and they're partners, and they're happily ever after. It's one of the only other happy endings in the visual novel, and it's just so sweet.
Yeah, I love stories that have, like, a really sad foundation. Like that. Like, it's like, well, we're kind of in this really bad situation. Let's just kind of, like, I like stories that have, like, a sad foundation, but we care about the hope. And it may not necessarily work out well, but that really works for me in stories. Where something is kind of terrible, but let's just make the best of it. That's really cool.
The only one that comes kind of close is the Suzuha ending, but that also has its... We don't really know what's going to happen. It could be bad, it could suck, but at least we're together.
Speaking about not really knowing what's going to happen, how did you feel about the final episode, which I had never seen until we watched it together, where they fly to America, that OVA?
I wish I'd been able to rewatch it before I got here, because I'd forgotten a lot of it, but I really enjoyed it. You didn't so much, if I recall?
No, I feel like it confirmed a lot of things that I wish weren't confirmed. So I want to speak about the ending a little bit of the canon ending, I guess, to Steins Gate, where Kurisu and Ocarina do pass each other on the street, and they have, like, that sense that, wait, I know this person. That's, to me, I love open-ended endings like that. Are very vague endings because of that hope, right? It's just like, well, in my mind, it would be sad if they didn't get together. It would be happy if they did. They probably will, but all those emotions are important to me. With the OVA, it's just like, it just confirms, yeah, no, I remember. I'm starting to remember the things and everything. And I'm like, well, you kind of ruined it for me, OVA. You kind of took that away from me, I guess. So I actually don't consider that a part of the story for me.
Yeah, look, the less serious tone isn't as cool, and I prefer my conclusions. That's probably not the conclusion I would go with, but I thought it was a fun time. I enjoyed it, and I will watch it again and again and again for that scene where Ocarina gets arrested by the TSA. That is fantastic. I am mad scientist. invade America, chaos. I love it so much.
I am math scientist. It's so cool. Son of a bitch.
What would be a conclusion that you would prefer? I'm curious.
Oh, maybe not prefer, but just some kind of... if anyone's seen Star versus the Forces of Evil, at the very end of that show, you've got Marco and Star facing each other. One says, hey, the other says, hey. They both smile, fade to black. Like, that's a kind of cute...
Yeah,
that's the kind of
That's the ending I want.
Yeah, that's the ending you want. And it kind of happens with Ocarina and Kirisu, but it's a bit more up in the air. And, yeah, I wouldn't say prefer, but if I could get a conclusion where they kiss and get married, I would.
There's a movie called Your Name that has something pretty similar, and I'm super into that. A lot of people have seen Your Name, so that's why I'm bringing
Call
it up
Me
here.
by Your Name?
No, Your Name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Let's talk about Ocarina for a second here. We're really talking about a lot of different characters, right? So we've got Okabe, Rintaro, right? We've got Ocarina, and we've got Hyun and Kuma. I feel like there's 3 different sort of personalities going on here. Which one do you think is the mask that he puts on? Really?
Oh, it's Kioma.
You think?
100%.
So
Onin Kioma is like the first level mask. I would say Okabe Rintaro, perhaps the second. And Ocarina is kind of his inner self, even though the name is given to him by Mayuri.
yeah, for sure. The reason I think about this a lot, because we had a small discussion about this just the other day, and the sorts of masks he put on. The mad scientist thing is initially a mask because he's trying to help Mayuri through problems, right? He's being like this fantastical, like hyper version of himself.
You're my hostage.
Yeah, you're my hostage sort of thing. And it's really sweet. But as the show goes on, like, that's way closer to the type of person he is than you think initially. And what makes me think about this is him going on a date with, like, Luca and Steins Gate Zero. So him going on a date with Luca is, like, kind of his base version, right? And it's not the Ocarina we know. It's not the Ocarina everyone likes. In the same way, in Steins Gate Zero, he's way more just straightforward. He's dropped the mad scientist bullshit because he has a goal and he wants to hit his goal. Which one's the real Ocarina?
Well, I mean, to a degree, the real Ocarina is all of them.
Mm-hmm.
I personally see... I think prior to the show, he buys into his own mask. That's where the whole Kioma comes in. But, like, as the show progresses, he sheds and sheds and sheds until at the very end, all you're left with is Ocarina. I would have said that on the date with Lukako, he's stepped back to Okabe Rintaro. But it's like that social norm mask that people... Because he's clearly not himself. He's got the suit, he's got the tie. Yeah. It's not until afterwards when he's shed all of that and he's having that conversation with Lukako before he erases the D-mail that he's really himself.
Yeah, I feel like we see the most of who he is with his struggles with the time leaping. I want to get into that a little bit later, but yeah, I would say somewhere in the middle of those is him. Probably. Like, the real him. There's lots of masks going on, and I think it's really interesting because when he puts on different masks, people react completely differently to him. And, I think the Lukako example is a pretty interesting one, where he puts on another mask, and everyone's just like, this isn't you, dude. Like, just be yourself. And a real date with Luca is them training outside the shrine. That's all Luca ever wants, is just to spend time with him. Not this formal, go to a fancy restaurant sort of bullshit. Because that's not who they fell in love with, right?
All of the dating advice that he gets. Oh boy, I love it. Especially the banter between him and Kirisu. When he's just like, you American version. And she's like, hey, no, you're still shit. It's crazy. I love those two.
We brought up Lukako here a little bit. And I feel like it's kind of important to talk about an aspect of this show that we haven't really touched on yet.
Let's get deep.
Let's get a little deep, because we can't go fully deep on this. So we don't have any, we're not trans people. We don't have like a trans lived experience. So as long as everyone understands that when we talk about this sort of thing, we're coming without having that lived experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the trans stuff in the show is really interesting. So Lukako presents as male but wishes that they were female in our Divergent. Well, almost every timeline. It's just one where they're not, right? That we know of.
Yes. I mean, there are a few world lines past Lukako's D-mail.
Oh, that's right. They go to one and then hop from there. Yeah, that's true. Because I think they do the lottery. They do the vegetables and then the
they do lottery.
Vegetables.
No, lottery, Moeka, vegetables, and then Faris? Yes.
Yeah, it's definitely not the first one to be undone. And man, that's gotta suck, right? That undoing all these, they all suck. But
Lukako's hurt me real deep.
Yeah.
It was one of the... Like, all of the others, I was kind of like, yeah, you just have to undo them. But Lukako's was one that made me cry.
It's heartbreaking. So, just in case nobody's seen it, Lukako is assigned male at birth, right? And just doesn't really feel like they're a boy at all, and just wishes they were female. And because, hey, we're switching parallel world lines, we actually find one where they were assigned female at birth. And...
by eating more vegetables.
By the mother eating more vegetables.
Yeah, convince them to eat more. It's a bit... That's where the science kind of...
yeah, it doesn't really matter. The fact is that it happens, and that's pretty interesting. To take that away from someone, that's rough, dude. Right?
No, can't handle it. It was very sad.
It's very cry time for sure. But speaking about that, I do, and just remembering our disclaimer from earlier regarding this topic, I do find it really interesting that in both timelines, and I think it's important that I put another disclaimer here. They do both have different lived experiences, so I want to make sure that I acknowledge that. But I do find it really interesting that whether they're assigned male or female at birth, they're the same person, right? They have the same likes and interests. It's just one's kind of like happier. They have less dysphoria than the other.
And one is very much openly in love with Ocarina. I guess transness in anime specifically... is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I always find it interesting because it can be somewhat...
Well, Japan's a bit further behind on it.
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say. Also, like, I'm going to go ahead and, like, claps to this writer and this team. This game came out in 2009 in Japan, and, like, this is, like, really progressive. If we're going to understand that context where it's coming from. This is really cool. Now, it has some... I did warn you before you went into the game or the show. I said, look, it's got some transphobic stuff in it. Like, Ocarina does find Luca attractive, but he keeps telling himself, but he's a guy, but he's a guy,
Ocarina is so no homo.
Yeah, he's got a very big case of the not gays. So it does have some, like... I would call it, like, it's some light problematic stuff. I don't think it's terrible or anything.
It's definitely one of the more positive representations in media, kind of in general, that I've seen. It's not perfect by any stretch.
It's important to say it's not perfect, but I do think it's pretty good. But again, please understand, we're talking about this not being trans people, so this is just our opinion, but that disclaimer is like super important, right?
Yeah.
But Lukako is great, and I love their dynamic. Like, again, just going back to that date thing, it's just they just want to, like, they're... Ocarina turns up the dial to 11 every time he's with Lukako, and it's just like, you need to swing your sword 1,000 times a day, and like I've got a demon hand.
Yeah, can you perform an exorcism? My hand's possessed. And Mayuri's like, wasn't it your left hand the other day?
And this is the Ocarina that like Luca loves, right?
Which just makes it all the more tragic. And also, going back again to the visual novel, I don't like Lucaco's ending. I think it's the weakest out of all of them.
Do you want to tell us? Yeah.
So Lucaco, they decide not to undo the D-mail, and Lucaco decides to do a time leap themselves and go back and spend a day with Mayuri at the Komima, where Lucaco cosplays for her, because they just want her to like have the happiest last day possible. And then Lucaco approaches Ocarina afterwards and hands him a handful of pictures, and it's all of them hanging out in Komima. It is very sweet. I don't think it's something that Lucaco... Like, if Lucaco was watching that, Lucaco would not do that. Because Lucaco loves Mayuri so much. But that also makes it all the more heartbreaking when you do erase the D-mail. Because it's just... it's so heartbreaking.
It is.
All of that sacrifice...
Yeah, and like essentially because these characters, as the show goes on, they start to remember previous timelines, and Lucaco does remember what it's like to be male essentially, and they choose to, if it's going to save Mayuri, they choose to go back to that. They're essentially accepting like a terrible fate.
And how Ocarina and Lucaco meet is skeezy, but also. It's what happens to trans people, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, man, the yikers when Ocarina goes to a timeline where they are the different sex, and he's just like, he hasn't realized it yet, and then gropes them to check.
Oh, that's the worst.
Not a big fan about that one.
Part. Kurisu does that as well. At one, I think it happens by accident. But people touching Lucaco is a thing.
Well, people touching anyone. Like, Ocarina touches Kurisu. Again, it wasn't in a skeezy way, but it definitely comes off that way. That's for sure. But no, I really like Lucaco as a character.
Lucaco is so sweet.
Oh, absolutely. And
Lucaco deserves everything.
Yes, and I point to this because you were hitting on it before. We don't really see this in media. Not really. Right? Or do you disagree?
No, I agree. But that's a bigger conversation for LGBT plus in general in media. Whoa. The conversation for another day, probably.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about Mayuri for a moment here. I'll hold off saying how I feel about her. How do you feel she fits into the story and her personality?
I am on the fence about Mayuri a little bit because I do love her. She's adorable. How could you not?
Tuturu! Hi, Okari!
But also, one of the cons of the show for me is the infantilization of Mayuri.
That was what I was going to hold off on.
She is treated like this dumbass, quirky girl. But, having said that, she is smart. Like, she figures out the Daru-Suzuha connection before anyone else does.
Yeah.
And another... I know why it's not in the anime, but in the visual novel, I got the Mayuri ending. And one of the main differences is that Mayuri and Ocarina see Kirisu off at the airport.
Okay.
And the emotional depth that Mayuri gets through that interaction is nowhere in the anime. And it really just shows this other side of her that we never get to see, and that's tragic. But of course, they're not going to do it because in the anime, Kirisu and Ocarina are the OTP. So of course they're not going to show that.
The one true pairing as it is.
And having also said that, like, the Mayuri ending in general, don't like. I I can't remember exactly how old Ocarina is, but there is a slight...
If I remember correctly, Mayuri is 16, and I believe Ocarina is 20.
Yeah, that age dynamic and the power dynamic between the two do not like.
Yeah. I pretty much have the exact same feelings you do with Mayuri. I do... The first few times I watched it, I wasn't really thinking about it that much, so I was just like, oh yeah, Mayuri's cool, whatever. I was watching it when I was a little bit older. I'm just like, man, they infantilized the absolute shit out of her. I'm not a fan of it. I do still like Mayuri. I just wish she kind of had maybe more an active role. Like, she doesn't need to get super involved with the D-mail stuff because she doesn't want to. She actually thinks it's harmful, and she's right in a lot of ways. She has a lot of compassion for everyone there. But she kind of just exists.
She's a bit of a foil for Ocarina. And
she's kind of got a check on him, actually.
yeah, I'm glad that she exists, and I like their friendship. I think as friends, they are quite adorable, but as soon as it gets romantic and shifts, that, and even just in general, again, the power dynamic, not great. He's 20, she's 16, like...
Yeah, for sure.
Why do they want to hang out with each other? I get that they met when they were younger, so it makes sense in that regard. Like, I have older friends, but...
I feel like the best scenes between the two of them are ones where, especially when Ocarina's having a tough time, and Mayuri just kind of pulls him back down to earth for a second. It's just like, hey, I believe in you. I don't know what... I think there's a specific conversation they have where Mayuri says, I don't know what your problem is, but just remember, I'm here for you. Like, it's okay.
This might be the exact same conversation, but there is a scene where literally she pulls... Well, he falls to his knees, and she goes to comfort him, and that positioning, you know, that they're on the same level, the power dynamic is not there in that scene.
Yeah, it's a vulnerability.
It's a vulnerability thing, and like that's just good scene framing. Or blocking, whatever you call it.
I wanna really sit on this topic for a while here. There's kind of two parts to this show. There's like pre-Mayuri and post-Mayuri, where she gets shot for the first time when Moeka comes in. Now, we kind of go from like almost a slice of life show with like a through line of what's happening to a really intense drama. What do they call them? Like a thriller, almost, where Ocarina is looping and looping and looping, trying to get a different result. And we had a good discussion about this. I just really want to touch on it again. When things like this happen, it may not be true, but I like to go with the version that's more tragic. So I like the idea with Groundhog Day that he's lived like 1,000 years stuck in this one day. That's how he builds all those skills and everything. I think the creator said it's probably like 100 years or something, but I like going even further. With Ocarina looping to save Mayuri, like, I like the idea that he's been at this for... I think they say it's a few months that he's doing it. I think at one point they do actually mention it, but I like the idea that he's been looping for a really long time. And consider this: he never gets to stop. If you go back to the same point every day, you're as energized as you were at that point, right? So he never gets tired, which means I don't know what this could possibly feel like. What is it like to be aware all of the time?
Well, they play it up for, going back to the Suzuha ending in the visual novel, they really take that to the extreme, because the difference between him looping to save Mayuri and him looping just to exist in the Suzuha line is like, in one time, like, different things are kind of happening, and the outcomes are slightly different each time. They're still the same, but they're different journey, I suppose. And in the Suzuha loop, every day is exactly the same. It gets to the point where he tells Daru to, like, step in front of a truck and kill himself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it gets real dark. And I think I mentioned earlier, with the newly animated scenes, his eyes go really... in this ending, they are dark, they're crazy.
I think they definitely show that even slightly in the show, where he kind of has dead eyes as he's going through this loop trying to save Mayuri.
Absolutely, but in this ending, he's just lost it. And Suzuha tells him, I can see your soul tearing apart. And the only way that he gets out of this loop is traveling with Suzuha to 1975. So yeah, they definitely take it to the extreme where you see and you hear him just losing his soul. It's tragic.
Especially seeing probably the person you care about the most in your entire life killed in front of you hundreds of times. I couldn't even imagine what that's like. That's rough.
One of my other favourite, most tragic moments that made me cry is one of Mayuri's deaths. She gets kidnapped very early by the Rounders and Moaka. They're sending Ocarin some threatening texts. They send him a news clip. I can't remember how far back it's dated. There's a body. It's been found somewhere in the world. There's a picture. It's a jellified Mayuri. And Ocarin panics and he thinks, oh shit, I've got to go save her. She's been kidnapped. And then he realizes, well, obviously I didn't save her. If I'm getting this news clip, she's already dead. And just, oh boy.
Yeah. That whole, Ocarin really shows who he is during that whole period. And that's really what brings... it's one of the catalysts, I should say, that get him and Kurisu closer, because he has to really trust her.
He comes to her begging for help.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first time I think he comes begging for help, and she tells him to erase the emails. Also, quick tangent. When I was first playing the visual novel, I thought that this was the climax, because for some reason I had it in my head that there were only 5 or 6 chapters in the visual novel. So I remember texting you saying, oh gee, it's getting really intense. I guess I'm at the end soon. And you're just like, no. Yeah.
I think I laughed, yeah.
Not even close.
No, there's a lot to go. Watching both, we have a mask for Ocarin that he puts on all the time to not show vulnerability. And to an extent, Kurisu does the same thing. And to watch them both pull their masks down together during these terrible things that are happening and grow close, that's what gets me every time watching this show. I always cry during the show. I try not to watch the show too much because I don't want to lose that impact. But, oh man, her understanding that she needs to give up her relationship with Ocarin to save Mayuri, and that she'll never even know him again if they go back to the 1% divergent timeline, that's so heartbreaking. It kills me.
It's funny because I really didn't get it at first, because when I played the visual novel, again, this is before I've seen the anime, I got the Mayuri ending, so I didn't get any of these interactions with Kurisu. Mm-hmm. And while I could see, where, of course, they're the one true pair, of course, but I just didn't get to have those interactions, so I didn't get the emotional moments that you would have had.
Sure, you agree. We don't need to record. We don't need to record.
We keep the cat.
We keep the cat in there.
The airport scene. Oh boy.
The Dr. Pepper.
The Dr. Pepper and the silent, not arigato, the silent...
Yeah, well, I don't know. To me, it's her saying, I love you, when she leaves, right? We're talking about the same thing, right?
Yeah. What's the Japanese word for goodbye?
Yeah, it's arigato.
It is arigato.
Yeah. A casual one would be jane.
Ah.
Yeah.
Yes, there's the silent arigato.
Yeah. Oh. That's really sad, dude. Because, she's accepted it at this point. She's not happy about it, but she knows it's, the morally right thing to do. And, man, that's... to give that up... It hurts. It gets me going. It gets me going.
So sad. I mean, it's kind of the same thing that happens with Lukako, except Ocarin actually reciprocates these feelings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Speaking of Ocarin and Kuruso, we got to talk about the lab coats. They look so good in lab. There's that one scene.
So good in. What does Ocarin say? Everything looks clean in a lab coat, everything looks good in a lab coat.
And they're true.
They're true.
That scene where they're kind of back to back doing a pose with the lab coats. Oh, it's so good.
That's a good background right there.
Let's talk about the opening of the show.
I remember when we first started watching, and I was like, oh, this doesn't hit as hard as Higurashi. Nothing ever will. And you're just like, just you. I changed my mind completely. By the end, I was like, yes. And rewatching it, I'm like, yes. I love the opening theme and just the music in general.
The music's very good.
Oh, it's beautiful. I can't remember the name of all of the tracks, but the one that I think it's called Observer, that they play when they're doing sciencey things. It's very good. All of the music is very sciencey. My favourite 2 tracks out of the whole thing are Believe Me and Solitude. I think Solitude's only in the visual novel.
Okay.
But they're both very slow. Da, da, da. This is very embarrassing to admit, but from now on till the end of time, whenever something even remotely sad or emotional happens in my life, I'm gonna hear Solitude playing in my mind. It's like how in Scrubs, when JD tells someone, oh, yeah, whenever something happens at this hospital, I hear that song, you know, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That's me with Steins Gate.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes, like, music, even if the music isn't terribly good, like, what we really care about is, like, the emotional attachment to it. So when it's good and you have a strong emotional attachment to it, it amplifies it. It's bigger than the sum of its parts, essentially. Like, it compounds on top of itself, and there are songs that I can hear the opening 5 notes to, and I start getting teary-eyed. Weight of the World, Near Automata, for one of those examples. And I'm finding as I get older, and this isn't a conscious decision, but music's affecting me more and more, and I don't really know why. I find it really interesting. I get way more emotional listening to a way a song sort of gets across its message. This is hard to say. There's a new season of Attack on Titan on right now, and there's a lot of themes in that show. I'm not going to go into them here, but the opening is like prideful but melancholic at the same time, and it's militaristic but sad, and like I don't know whether it's better that I'm better at singling out these emotions than I used to be, but I feel it more than I used to. Have you had anything similar happen to you in your life?
I mean, the older I get, music gets more intense emotional responses. I think that is slightly to do with nostalgia, because you can't exactly be nostalgic for something you've just heard on the radio, but I'm very nostalgic for some of the early 2000s pop hits, 90s babies.
No, I'm not a 90s baby.
This is for us 90s babies.
Yeah, you stay over on your side of the table, alright?
Filthy millennials. So that makes sense. But also, I feel like games and media in general have evolved, and the quality of music plus what we can produce at like lower budget levels, like the music's just better.
Oh, yeah. Music, yeah, absolutely agreed. I guess we're just from what I'm trying to say here, because I'm not really good at putting this into words, I've definitely noticed a shift with how I relate to music and media, because I always liked Steins Gate. I was always emotionally attached to Steins Gate, but now I'm more attached and it hits me harder and I get more emotional. And I don't just mean like in I get teary-eyed or whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to be a sad thing, but I just feel it.
Or you feel it deep in your soul.
Yeah. So I think the music is used like in visual novels. They'll use the same tracks a lot because visual novels are really long. But I think that's used. I feel like the way they use the tracks in Steins Gate, even though they may use the same sort of ones a lot, I think are used incredibly well.
Absolutely, it's never boring. It's kind of like how the anime, I don't feel like, has any filler.
No, it's a straight line.
And they do the same with the music.
I watched the show initially with somebody else, and they thought the start was kind of boring. And I get what they mean, because the show is kind of a little bit scatterbrained and slice of lifey at the start. But even though that may be the case, I don't necessarily agree with it, but I see what they mean. Everything there is there for a reason, is referred to, and they're all Chekhov's guns, essentially. Whether it's an interaction with somebody or a future gadget that they have. It's just like, oh, here's some random future gadgets that we've invented, but they all come into play. Like the claymore that is a humidifier, that comes in. Like, that comes in the struggle with Moeka. It was just an offhanded thing that they used at the start. Or the laser gun remote control.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they all actually just they come back in important ways. Even if the start has like a slower pacing or is more slice of lifey, all the small little interactions or things that they bring up all come back. It's a straight line, all killer, no filler.
As Kirisu and Faris would say, that's a flag.
That's a flag?
Yeah, they point out the love flags and the Yuri flags.
I don't remember this at all.
Fresh rewatch, baby.
Yeah, it's a fresh rewatch. It's the last time I watched this was with you, which was
couple of months ago.
Yeah, 4 months maybe.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Joel, what would you do for science?
In what context?
Well, would you go time traveling?
I feel like if I knew, this is kind of like Kurisu's and Okarin's and CERN's prerogatives, right? If it's possible, it matters. If something this important is possible, it kind of matters how it's distributed. I really like a point where there's two reasons why Okarin's doing this, but he wants to stop Mayuri dying, and one of the ways he tries to do it is just like, hey, look, I'm washing my hands of this. We're going to release the information about this to the public, and we're going to let the world stage figure out how to deal with this problem. And I think that's a really responsible way to deal with this sort of thing. I think it is important that if you stumble across something like this, that you do treat it responsibly. Obviously, CERN doesn't. They want to be the first. They've been working at this for decades. This brings up a lot of ethical problems because they're essentially just doing it for greed.
And they're killing a lot of people. Like those Jellyman reports, there's a lot of them.
There's a lot of them. Human is dead. Mismatch. And, I mean, Okarin abuses this power as well. I mean, the lottery ticket thing and just, like, trying to... And, like, it's a good message of the show. Trying to fix all these perceived problems that everybody has is actually just causing more issues because of the butterfly effect, essentially. And that's why I really like, at one point where Okarin does want to release the information to the world. Because that's probably the best way to deal with something like that. Now, will that cause problems? Of course. Leading nations are going to do absolutely everything that they can because they're kind of forced to, because if they don't, some other nation will. So they'll be forced to do something. That brings up a whole bunch of ethical problems, but that's probably the most moral thing that you could do, because we are aware at least one group of people knows that this is possible. So you kind of have a responsibility in that point. So there's a very long way to answer your question of what would I do. I think the best outcome... I can't say that I wouldn't necessarily be selfish with that sort of power. I mean, I'm only human. I can't tell you how I would act unless I was under those conditions. But I feel like the most responsible thing to do would be to release the information. Absolutely. What?
No, that's a good answer.
What would you do? How do you feel about that?
We both know how I feel about that. I'm not touching it. Time travel is for... time travel will always lead to disaster. I don't want to grandfather paradox myself. I think it should just stay in science fiction.
How do you feel about, like, the attire in this show? So, we've got the lab coat standing. We've got lots of different outfits, because Mayuri cosplays, and wants to cosplay with Lukako as well. We've got Kurisu's weird, like, half jacket with belt straps.
I think she explains that it's her American uniform.
Yeah, but it doesn't make the design any less weird, right? Like, it's like a hanging jacket. There are belts tied to her forearm. Well, not her forearms, her arms. Do you remember this?
I do remember. I'm just trying to... I feel like she explains why. I don't remember the context.
It's like permanently falling off her back, but she's got straps on her arms to keep it from falling. It's the weirdest thing ever. And then, like, Moaka's, like, leather jumpsuit.
Oh, the leather jumpsuit. If I wasn't already bisexual, I would be now.
Well, I really like Suzuha's outfit because it's very, like, military, right? It's
I
very
suppose.
uniform. I suppose you didn't really think about this stuff a lot.
No,
but...
I did not. I hate to disappoint.
No, it's fine. It's just, I feel like the way they're presented is actually pretty interesting.
Definitely her second outfit is a lot more military.
Oh,
but I suppose
absolutely.
that also ties into she's not looking for Daru in the timeline where she's wearing the she basically comes straight from 2036.
Because Daru is like looking for her dad is like a little bonus thing that she's doing.
So it makes sense that she has a casual attire that is also uniformy.
We didn't talk about this, but speaking of Suzuha, how about that time where she fails at her mission? So she goes to set it up, and correct me because I might get parts of this wrong. She goes back in time to the 70s and lives like a full life trying to find an IBM 5100 and doesn't. And if I'm not wrong, she commits suicide, right?
So what happens is because she stays with the gang to search for her dad, the time machine breaks because there's a thunderstorm. And the fix that Daru does is imperfect. So when she goes back to the 70s, it crashes and she loses her memory. So for 24 years, she lives not knowing who she is, not knowing what she's there for. And then 10 years before she commits suicide, she gets her memories back and she can't find an IBN. And then, it's tragic. Like, the gangs just sent her off. They expect her to have done this mission. They get the letter from Mr. Brown, and then it turns out that
it was a failure.
I failed. Tears, so many tears.
Yeah, it's
I was
really sad.
devastated.
And if I'm not wrong, like, she had a relationship with not a romantic one, but she had a relationship with Mr. Braun, right? Like, he was in her house.
We touched on it earlier, but she actually takes him in, which is very cute because he takes her in as the part-timer and then she takes him in.
I never thought about that. It's like poetry. It rhymes.
Well, she tells him right before she... Well, not right before she dies, but she tells him, he asks why... Yeah.
Yeah, it's like if you have someone applying for you or
No.
something. Oh.
So he asks, why did you help me? And she goes... Because that's just what you should do. In the future, if someone asks you for help them.
Yeah, Suzuha might be... I mean, I love Kurisu and Okabe. I mean, they're definitely the focus of the story. But I like Suzuha so much. I love her character.
She's so cute.
She's so serious.
Very serious. But also, like, she's so lighthearted.
She wants to see fireworks for the first time.
She's never eaten fresh corn.
And Okabe's like... They're just fireworks. And she's just like, yeah, but I want to see that. I've never seen fireworks before. Like,
There's a flag.
It melts my heart. You recently... So you've interacted with this more than I have. You've played the visual novel. You've seen the anime. I've seen the anime many times, but you've now gone over it several times. And at some point in the future, whether a podcast or no, we will go through Zero. There's also an anime for Zero as well. You were telling me recently that you had a quick check at the dub, because we do all this subbed, right?
I was very tired. I had something to do, so I checked out the dub. Oh boy, dub is cursed, ladies and gentlemen. It is so cursed. So I'm just going to go through the list that I have of all of the voices. Ocarina is so obnoxious. Like, dial up how obnoxious he is at the start of the anime to 20.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible. He's so bad. Oh, Mayuri is adorable, but the fact that she has a kind of deeper voice is off-putting.
Because she's very...
She's very...
Yeah, exactly.
Daru's okay. Kirisu is... Suzuha... Suzuha was great. She sounds just like Rainbow Dash from My Little Pony.
Oh, I know exactly what that sounds like.
Yeah. Moeka, she's about what I would have expected. She's about on par. And Ferris, I thought I would instantly hate because I love Ferris so much. But the delivery is actually so sincere that I instantly loved it.
You lose all privileges to like Ferris since you were
so sus on her.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm not you should do sub over dub.
No.
I don't care, but there are some dubs that I am just like, nope. Like, I won't do it with Fairy Tail. I'm not going to do it with Steins Gate.
Generally speaking, I do prefer subs over dubs, but it's only because of, like, generally speaking, in the past, it just has been better. But there are certain things now that I, like, Western voice acting for Japanese products continues to increase in quality. I just played 13 Sentinels, all in English. Absolutely fantastic. Yakuza 7 Like a Dragon Quest. That's fantastic in English. So I can see why people feel that way. But, like, get off your high horse. Like, it's fine.
I definitely prefer dubs to watching shows if I want to have it in the background. But, like, subs are great if you can pay attention.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you have the capacity to, like, sit and read subs, because I know a lot of people just don't have that brain power, which makes sense. It takes a lot of concentration.
No, absolutely. I want to talk about the time loop conundrum that we go into. So that means I want to talk about Steins Gate 0 a little bit. So we haven't gone through Steins Gate 0 at all. Well, we touched it.
Like 5 minutes of it, maybe.
But we're aware of the context surrounding it. So in Steins Gate 0, at the end of Steins Gate, there is a version of Ocarina that we see from the future. And if it was not for that version of Ocarina would not be able to save the day, essentially. He gets one more chance. Future Ocarina gives him the advice that he needs. He gets very clever. He fakes Kurisu's death, so on and so forth. If you know the story, all this makes sense. What I find fascinating is there had to be a failed version of this occurring for the winning version to exist. And that's what Steins Gate 0 is. It is... There's a divergent point right at the end of the anime where 0 starts, where Ocarina fails, he loses... Like... It's kind of where he loses that mask. He becomes very somber, but he gets a new will to succeed, and he will do anything it takes to succeed. And that's the Ocarina we see in the future. He's become a legitimate scientist as opposed to kind of a fake one. Incredibly intelligent, creates a working time machine with Daru, of course. You know, it's not just him. Leads a terrorist organization against CERN, an entire rebellion. Just so, and you'd think those would all be for good reasons, and they exist, but it's really just to save Kurisu, because he's selfish in this aspect, and I think it's a good selfishness. He had to go through all that pain, a version of him that he'll never know. Our Okabe will never know that version, but a version of him suffered so that a version of him that the suffered version will never know has a better future. I'm reminded of a show called Misfits, a British show called Misfits, where something similar happens. There's a character that can go through time, and without going into it too much, he has a failure to succeed as well. There's a period of time where he's in a relationship that's really important to him, but that relationship only existed because a future version of himself allowed it to exist. And he kind of has to sacrifice his life for that to happen. And he knows how important that time was to him, that when it's his turn, he will go back and sacrifice his life in the same way that the one did before him. That type of storytelling is the most effective for me. We see this in Final Fantasy VIII, see this in Steins Gate and Misfits, and a couple other examples I can't think of right now, but it's really effective. And yeah, I mean, I kind of just like talked about the whole thing without any input from you, but I mean, does this have like a large impact on you? Like how much does the I'm sacrificing myself for myself for a version I'll never know, how does that work for you?
It's a bit of an emotional brain fuck in a sense, because you're grappling with these scientific concepts on top of, you know, the emotional grab. But also, like, I've also seen Misfits, and that relationship, so heartbreaking and yet so beautiful. Excellent storytelling. I totally agree. I love that Steins Gate Zero was the sequel that I guess we didn't know we wanted.
Yeah.
Because no one really thinks about, like, what happened in the failed timeline, but now we know.
If we had a sequel that was just these people living their lives after the successful timeline, I don't think I'd be interested.
Well, you've already clarified you wouldn't be because you didn't like the new OVA. And I can see it. Like, it really wouldn't be that interesting. You'd want a slice of life that's kind of either prior to Steins Gate or during.
Yeah, there's a show called Full Metal Panic, and that's a pretty serious show, and there's a sequel to it called Full Metal Panic Fumofu. It's not really a sequel, but it's just a slice of life show, and I never got into it because it's like I don't need the happy version of this story, because that's not what attracted to me to the story in the first place. And that's not to say I don't like happy stories, but like I don't need that side of things. I don't need this is kind of like a Neon Genesis thing as well. I don't need that. Oh, here's them here living their happy lives and, you know, being science and like tripping over and falling on top of each other. I don't need that. That's not why I'm here. And you're spot on. You said it perfectly. This was the sequel I didn't know I needed. When I first saw Steins Gate Zero, I actually had a different idea of what it was, and I hated it. I hated the idea of it, because I didn't quite understand that it was the failed timeline. The moment I learned it was the failed timeline, I'm like, oh shit, this is exactly what I want. And we haven't gone through it. We started the visual novel, but I'm so excited at one point in the near future getting into that. Even though I have a rough outline of what actually happens in that story, going through it I think will be very good.
More Steins Gate? Oh no, what a tragedy.
More Steins Gate that matters. Yeah.
And, you know, to add on to what you were saying, there is a beauty and an emotional catharsis in tragedy that you don't get in slice of life happy ending things. Which, like, it's fine if you don't like a sad ending, but we do.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say, to speak for the both of us here, it's just like put that tragedy, inject it straight into my veins. I need it at all times. Why is there not more tragic media? I know there's heaps. Give me more though, please. Give me
more things that make me burst into tears.
Yes. And just because that's the sort of thing that I'm really into, we're probably going to see a lot of that with my nominations. It's not like I'm trying to do that, but it's probably just going to come up randomly. But hear me now for future reference. If you're just like, wow, Joel really recommends a lot of sad shit, it's just like, yeah, this is the reason why. This is what I empathize with the most in media. Not saying it's the best, but it's the best for me.
And as I said in episode 0, I'm very attracted to things that make me feel intensely. Doesn't matter what emotion it is. Just intense feelings, great. So I suspect I'm going to really enjoy some of the sadness that you're going to shoot my way.
Yeah, I've got a couple on my mind right now that I think you would like a lot.
Oh, it's so exciting.
Let's wrap this up with a best worst. All right, what was your? It doesn't have to be your absolute favorite, but what's the moment that stands out to you that was one of your favorites? What's the moment that is just? It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad moment, but something that you didn't enjoy as much.
Oh, here we go. Best. Faris ending.
Faris ending in the visual novel.
Forever love that ending. I love the canon one more, but that Faris ending is great. Worst, anyone touching Lukako without consent.
Yeah, look, I'm just going to agree with that one for the worst. People are way too handsy in general in this show. But...
I've seen a lot worse handsy-wise,
yeah.
but yeah, they are a bit.
I would say Kurisu saying farewell to Ocarina, like that willing decision to give up that relationship to save a life. It actually breaks me every time I watch this. It's definitely one of my favorite moments. And yeah, I guess that's it for Steins Gate. I mean, I had a great time bonding over this with you and just watching it again because I love it so much. And I just think it's a fantastic show. I mean, we have just talked about it a lot, but really, if you've listened to all this and you haven't played the game or watched the show, Go do one of these things.
Go do it. It is fantastic. It's one of the best animes I've ever seen. It's one of the best visual novels I've played, even though I haven't played that many. And again, I played Steins Gate Elite, not the original. So
yeah, Elite you can find on most systems.
Yep, I got it on the PS4 for pretty cheap when it was on sale, but it's pretty expensive if not.
Visual novels. Wait. I will say this, visual novels are kind of known for being very pricey. It doesn't really matter what one it is. So you could also just watch the show. I mean, it's short. It's 25 episodes, I believe.
Yeah, that sounds right.
It's pretty easy to go to, very digestible. What do you...
Go through. What are you waiting for?
What are you waiting for? Watch Steins Gate.
Worst case, you can just go through a time loop.
Worst gate. Don't live the worst gate timeline where you don't interact with Steins Gate. That's what I say. Okay, Julia, how many gel bananas out of 10 do you find Steins Gate?
10 out of 10 gel bananas, baby.
A full 10 out of 10?
A full 10 out of 10.
I will also give it a 10 out of 10. I mean, I did say it in episode 0. I do consider this like my favorite anime. I mean, depending on the day, you give different answers for things, but if not the best, close to the best anime I've seen, and the one I care about the most, so yeah.
It's not the one I care about the most. You'll find out which, but it's pretty damn close.
I'm really glad you enjoyed this. Because
it was a great bonding moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Steins Gate is clearly very important to me, and it is. I don't mind if people don't like a thing that I recommend to them. It's a shame, but if they don't like it, they don't like it. But one of the best feelings I ever have is when I recommend something to somebody and they absolutely love it. So
when you vibe, you vibe. All right, time for my first nomination for the show.
Oh no. I'm scared.
Don't be scared.
I'm so scared. No.
I think you'll be interested in this. So, next episode, I'm nominating Interstate 60.
Oh, interesting.
Hey.
You could have Go.
So, we've already watched this, so I'm hoping this will be easy for you. Interstate 60, I was introduced to this by one of my exes while we were dating. And I don't understand why no one has seen this movie.
I'd never heard of it.
It's really good. It's an interesting time. It's a monkey paw tale, so instantly I was intrigued. It's about a kind of American folklore genie. I won't go too much into it because we'll cover it next episode, but I really love this movie. And yeah, it was one of the kind of inspirations for the podcast. It's definitely one you came up with a lot of examples for.
Yeah, when I was discussing we talked about it in episode 0, but when I was discussing the types of things I want to talk about, that we want to talk about on this show, it's kind of like yeah, no one's heard of this thing. Like, let's talk about this thing that no one's heard of. And my example for that was, that weird movie that you recommended to me. And we watched, and it was interesting.
So I thought we'd get that out of the way. And I'm very excited to hear your in-depth thoughts.
Me too.
くれさてなだ
Next episode, Joel goes on a bit of a road trip.
But I can't even drive.
See you next time.
See ya.
犠牲された誓い無事になる順位の支配逃れられない安息の明日願った天の中の尊い不詳の地平へ囚われし名役現れた偽証の輪郭生命の天使はもう僕ら時間を刻んだ羽ばたけばファイ奇跡のバーファイあなたへ捧ぐ涙のバーファイ眩しいバーファイ全てが今書き換えられる
I've written Moika's slow walk into the lab. Oomph. As in, like, when she first walks in, after you, and she's wearing, like, the leather suit.
Oh, Moika. Yeah.
Oomph, as in, I felt that in my giblets. And this is Jellyman Shiro.
We don't need to record. We don't
Yeah,
need to
we
record
keep the
that.
cat.
We keep the cat in there.
I
I might just bring him down because I don't want him to crinkle. You're having a good time. I'm going to lock you out because we're only going to talk for like another 30 minutes, okay, buddy?